The plot of the novel begins in the county of Floretta. Parents talk to their young unmarried daughter about finally getting married. The girl agrees with them. The man and woman did not expect this. Usually, the conversation ended with the girl rejecting the idea in any form. But this time, the father couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't believe that Sylvia was ready to marry the Duke of Belffort. The mother said that they weren't forcing her to do it. If she didn't want to, she could just refuse. The girl didn't understand her parents' reaction because she didn't think she was always acting so strangely. Sylvia had spent the last 22 years in bed due to illness. Therefore, she had no opportunity to go out and attend balls and parties where young aristocrats usually gathered. The girl slept a lot. It made it easier for her to endure the attacks of the illness from which she had suffered for a long time. Finally, Sylvia decided that it was time to stop suffering and tormenting her family. Therefore, it was not even worth thinking about. Her father was against the Duke of Beaufort. Although His Majesty himself had recommended the aristocrat as a son-in-law, the man did not consider him a good match for his daughter. He was ready to look for another son-in-law. Sylvia assured him that she was ready to marry the Duke. She advised her parents to calm down. Her parents cried with happiness. The moment they had been waiting for had finally arrived. Sylvia Floretta was the only daughter of the Count. Therefore, she was constantly surrounded by the attention of her parents, who were ready to fulfill all her requests and desires. Her father and mother always tried to please her by buying her things. Their daughter was not capricious, so she was happy with even the smallest things. She asked for very little. The most important thing for her was comfort during rest. Therefore, the only thing that mattered to her was the bed she slept in. Sometimes the girl behaved very strangely, which worried her parents. They often talked about how their poor daughter would live when they died. The woman asked her husband not to even think about such things. The old count told his wife that they would not be able to take care of their daughter forever. Sooner or later, her parents would die of old age, and Sylvia would be left alone in this terrible and treacherous world. Together, her parents agreed that they had to find a husband for their daughter before they started to feel the effects of old age, or before they fell ill. The search took a long time, and her father almost lost hope. But just in time, the king said that the count could take the Duke of Belfort as his son-in-law. The father could not believe that Sylvia would agree to marry a man she had never seen before. The count and his wife were very happy that they would be able to marry off their daughter before they grew old and died. They did not even think about the fact that the Duchy of Belfort had a bad reputation. Demons often visited there, and Sylvia hoped that she would die there very quickly. In fact, the motive that prompted the girl to agree to her parents' proposal was the desire to end her suffering. The girl was afraid to commit suicide. She did not have the courage to do so. The count and his wife had no idea what their daughter was planning until she left the county. On the wedding day, everyone was talking about this momentous event. The subjects were delighted that their lord had finally decided to marry and continue the glorious line of the Dukes of Belfort. People congratulated each other on this event. The Duke himself did not understand such a reaction. Previously, everyone had tried to dissuade him from his intention. Now, on the contrary, they were rejoicing like children. They were as happy as if the celebration were to take place in their own homes. No one looked at him with surprise anymore. The Duke was next in line to the throne after the crown prince. Therefore, all the aristocrats of the country were suspicious of his wedding. But despite all this, the congratulations from his friends and subjects were sincere and heartfelt. The only thing they asked of him on this day was not to frown or look angry in front of his bride. Otherwise, the poor girl would be frightened and run away from the church during the wedding ceremony. A few months ago, he hadn't even thought about marriage. But everything changed when the idea was raised at the royal court that the Duke should marry a woman of good birth. His Majesty himself said that Count Floretta had a daughter of marriageable age. She was extremely beautiful but had certain health problems. His family was ancient, so they were an excellent match. Belffort himself thought it was coercion, well disguised as a proposal. His Majesty was concerned that the Duke could expand his possessions and influence in the political arena. Belffort did not want to become tied to the capital's aristocracy. It was in his best interest to simply strengthen his dominion, as his lands bordered the demon kingdom of Kelvisha, and military strength was therefore paramount. On the other hand, his refusal to the king could cause a food crisis in his lands. and then the situation would become even worse. After weighing all the pros and cons, the Duke agreed to His Majesty's proposal. The Duke looked at his subjects, who were rejoicing and shouting loudly with happiness. He couldn't believe that people could care so much about his fate. The young man suspected that they were doing it out of politeness. Everyone was confident that the wedding would make the ruler kinder and more gracious. But he promised that upon his return, he would add more dawn training for his soldiers and knights. The court magician Austin created a magical portal that would transport the Duke directly to the capital. There was a certain risk involved in using portals for transportation, but it was quite small. The wizard asked Belffort to step aside and wait a little. The magician worked on the portal for a very long time, almost all night. The aristocrat praised him for his good work. Trust and gratitude were the main values in his organization. The Duke thought about how he would like to get along with his wife. But to do that, he needed to weaken his inner defenses and get rid of the complexes that were holding him back. And Count Floretta could turn out to be a spy. But he dismissed the doubts from his mind. After all, it wouldn't change anything, and he was already nervous enough. The Duke strode resolutely into the portal. The unknown awaited him ahead. In the wedding hall, Sylvia's parents warned her that if her husband or his family mistreated her, she could return home and not have to endure their abuse. The Count and his wife promised that they would outlive her. The girl assured them that everything would be fine. She asked to be left alone before the ceremony. She thought about how she would live the life she feared and did not want. In the hallway, she met Duke Belffort. The bride introduced herself, but she did not tell him the whole truth. She used to be Alice. Before her rebirth, Sylvia was a different person from another world. Sylvia's real name was Alice. She was a powerful sorceress, humanity's last hope in the war against demons. She had been reborn 100 times in other bodies to prevent the demons from taking over. Everyone respected the sorceress. She enjoyed the respect and love of the masses. But her main task and purpose in life was to fight the demons. She did everything she could to achieve this, and Alice crossed the line in her struggle. To gain a new powerful force, Alice began to study the dark grimoires written by the demons themselves. The sorceress coped with the forces of darkness. The warrior opened a portal to the world of demons. Overjoyed, she told her colleagues about her success. But then something happened that no one expected. The magicians pushed Alice into the realm of demons. The reason was that they began to fear her. The girl spent a lot of time in the darkness of the demon world. She tried in every way to find out why this had happened, but she could not find the answer. After all, her intentions were good. She wanted to protect herself. A year passed. Alice, who fought alone, without allies, defeated the chief demon, the king of the underground creatures, Basis, and became the supreme ruler, climbing a mountain of demon skulls. By then, she had lost her human form. Drunk on her own power, she had gone mad from everything that had happened to her. Weak people were easy prey for the sorceress and could not resist her. At a time when despair had taken hold of the people, a man appeared. He was an unusual man. His name was Cleon. He was the one who was able to use the spirit of the sword and finally defeat the mad, once powerful sorceress. It was at the tip of this legendary sword that Alice died. Before her death, she was full of hatred for everything human, which caused her misfortune and led to such an end. All people became scum to her, but after her death, the girl was reborn in a strange world. Everything around her was dazzlingly white. Alice remembered perfectly how she had been killed by the sword. A voice from somewhere addressed the sorceress and called her a broken soul. She was told that the power of darkness she wanted to master had brought much misery to humanity and taken the lives of many people. And now, it was time to pay for her sins. The punishment was cruel. God ordered Alice to live and repeat her life exactly 99 times in a cycle of reincarnation. After that, she tried to commit suicide several times, but she could not die of her own free will. Throughout the cycle of reincarnation, she was severely tormented. She was constantly watched by messengers of the gods. And every time she thought about suicide, she was punished. The Duke asked her if they had ever met before. He asked the girl not to be afraid of him. However, this was difficult for a girl who had never interacted normally with the opposite sex. Nevertheless, Sylvia tried to behave appropriately. When they entered the hall, all the guests' attention was focused on the newlyweds. Greetings rang out from all sides. The Duke thought his bride was very beautiful, and the thought arose in his mind that he would have to take care of her in the future. The girl, in turn, believed that there would be no problems as long as she diligently performed her duties. The priest declared them husband and wife, and each of them took their vows before the altar. It was time for the kiss. Belffort looked at his knights. He thought that his men would continue to mock him. Therefore, he decided to pretend that he liked it and show how much he loved his young wife. He didn't know how Sylvia felt. Perhaps she was just as embarrassed as he was. There was a moment of awkwardness, but it quickly passed. The Duke asked Sylvia not to be shy and to relax. Then they kissed. Both were satisfied, but neither showed it. Sylvia thought that now she had to be more careful. God had to see that everything was fine with her new husband. And for that, she had to pretend that everything was fine. She had to play the role again. Belffort danced with his wife. He was simply enchanted by the girl's beauty. It would be more accurate to say that she was actually a demon. Her beauty was extremely captivating. Sylvia also considered her husband to be the standard of beauty. Surely all the aristocratic women around her dreamed of him. But the girl felt that she was getting sick from being tired. It was time to end the reception. The Duke thought that his wife looked too mature for her age. You couldn't tell right away that she was 22. But how beautiful she was. And everything else was unimportant against this backdrop. And while the man was thinking about how to address her, the girl suggested that he call her Sylvia. The Duke thought he must have said it out loud. How else could she have guessed? Then Sylvia added that he could call her whatever he wanted. She would be pleased either way. The Duke was taken aback by her boldness and informality, but he quickly regained his composure. He suggested she call him Randell, or whatever she thought was appropriate. But he wasn't used to being informal when people addressed him too formally. The girl said he was a nice man. The maid told the girl to be ready to leave as soon as the reception was over. Everything had already been prepared for this. In the meantime, the Duke had to think about his future plans. The Count and Countess Floretta approached him. Randell said that his wife had stepped away for a moment. He promised that he would do everything his daughter wanted for her, and if he missed anything, they should let him know. The Count asked him to take care of their only child, who was very ill. The Duke assured him that they could rely on him. He would take good care of his wife. But first, he wanted to ask a couple of questions. Randell asked if their daughter had really spent 22 years at the estate. The parents were concerned about this question and could not understand what their son-in-law was getting at. The father looked at Randell in confusion. The Count replied that the truth was as follows. Their daughter had not simply spent 22 years at the estate. She had spent a great deal of time in bed, from which she rarely got up. She was in poor health by nature. Sometimes the girl could sleep for a whole day, so it was not surprising how she sometimes behaved. The longest sleep she had when she felt ill lasted 3 days. The Duke couldn't believe that a person could sleep for 3 days. So he decided that he would take his wife for a walk at least once a day. The magician told Randell that the magic circle for the departure was ready. Belffort praised his servant. He ordered him to find his wife and tell her that it was time to go to her new home. The Duke was worried whether she would like her new possessions. Sylvia thought about her husband in the carriage. He was very kind, but she felt sorry for him. His attitude was even better than her parents'. And then she realized that after her death, he would marry again. The girl thought more and more about the place she was going to. It was very far from her father's estate and her home. The journey had tired her a little, and Sylvia decided to go to bed as soon as they arrived. But looking at her husband, the girl realized that she would have to make an effort today. After all, it was their wedding night, and she couldn't embarrass herself in front of her beloved husband and show herself in a bad light. The Duke asked Austin how he was feeling. He looked quite unwell. The wizard replied that everything was fine, but that Belffort needed to stop using the magic portal to travel. It took a lot of time and energy from the wizard. There were more effective and reliable ways to travel. They did not require so many internal resources. The Duke agreed to try something new next time. Randell asked if there was a way to transport them to the castle immediately. He said that Austin was actually a very powerful magician and should be able to handle the task. The wizard understood his master's motives. Austin asked Randell if he was willing to pay extra for his efforts. After all, he had used up his last reserves of mana that morning, and to restore it, he needed a good rest, which required money. If his master refused to pay extra, the magician would do nothing. This was his principled position regarding his efforts and work for Duke Belffort. The Duke felt uneasy. A strange noise caught his attention. Belffort ordered the magician to create a magical dome around the carriage and the knights. There was a possibility of a demon attack on the retinue. The man drove up to the carriage and ordered Sylvia to close the windows and cover them with curtains. She must not reveal her presence. After all, danger was clearly in the air. The attack was about to begin. A demon that looked like a dog or a wolf jumped out of the forest. The Duke ordered his men to form a circle, as such a monster never attacks alone. But the main priority now was to protect the carriage. In an instant, the entire detachment was surrounded by silk-like demons. There were far fewer people than attackers. It was strange that there had never been monsters in this forest before, and they appeared here today. The bodies of the monsters already covered the ground, but the attackers were not diminishing in number. The knights could not understand where the monsters were coming from. The people began to tire of holding their defense, but their lives depended on it. The Duke stood among his defeated enemies. He regretted that his wife had been attacked by demons before they even reached his domain. He was most concerned about how she was feeling. Geoffrey, Duke Belfort's knight, finally saw that the number of attackers was decreasing. Only 5 monsters remained. The Duke had defeated most of the demons. None of the knights could match his power. Unexpectedly, 2 children emerged from the forest. They were simply walking along the path, trying to find their way to the village. The knight asked what the children were doing in such a place, and how they had managed to avoid the monsters. Geoffrey ordered them to quickly leave the battlefield and go to the carriage. After all, it was unknown whether the attackers were lurking nearby. But the children, realizing where they were, could not even move. The knight was distracted by the children, and one of the attackers took advantage of this. With a powerful blow, the monster threw Geoffrey under the carriage. The monster fell into a fighting frenzy and was therefore almost invulnerable to human attacks. At the last moment, the Duke saw his wife getting out of the carriage. He couldn't understand what was driving her. Randell shouted for her to hide back inside, but the monster was faster. It attacked. The monster's movements were so lightning fast that Belffort doubted he would be able to help in time. On top of that, there were more demons, and the number of defenders was rapidly dwindling. But then something happened that none of the defenders expected. An aura of darkness surrounded Sylvia's figure. The monsters fell dead at her feet. The girl asked Geoffrey, who had seen this, to keep quiet. No one was to know about this. The Duke ran up to his wife. He asked if she was all right. The girl assured him that everything was fine. She said she was impressed by how bravely her defender had fought. Then she pointed to Geoffrey, who was lying nearby. The knights rushed to their wounded comrade. They asked the sorcerer for help. A spell had to be cast to stop the bleeding. The magician ordered the victim to be laid on the ground. Sylvia didn't notice when she took the Duke's hand. She realized it later, and to break the silence that had fallen between them, she assured her husband that the knight would live, and that he would continue to fight monsters. But to do that, they had to get to the Duke's castle as soon as possible. Randell valued the life of each of his soldiers very highly. He always kept the most loyal and experienced warriors, with whom he had fought many times, close to him. A few days after arriving at the castle, everyone who had been present during the demon attack gathered around the knight. His comrades rejoiced that Justin had survived and was beginning to recover. Everyone talked about how Austin had done everything in his power to save him. The knight apologized to his new mistress for the bad impression he had made on her during their first meeting. Besides, he remembered how she had defended herself against the monster that had attacked her. Sylvia replied that nothing terrible had happened, and that the most important thing was that everyone was alive. She wondered how the children they had met in the forest were doing. It was necessary to send messengers to the villages to find out if the children had disappeared. The Duke's wife saw that the knight would not have been able to save her on his own, as he was much slower than the attacker. So the girl used the magic she still remembered, and it proved to be very effective. She thought to herself that she had not used her knowledge of black magic for a long time, but somehow she was able to do it. But to be honest, when the demon approached her, she thought that death was not such a bad option. The Duke assured Geoffrey that he would receive triple pay for his work to restore his health. The Duke cared for his subjects, especially when they were his soldiers. The girl looked at her husband and wondered how he would have reacted if he had seen the torn and mangled body of his beloved. After all, he was so young by her standards, and had fallen so deeply in love with her in such a short time. Therefore, feeling sorry for the young Duke, Sylvia decided that she would live on because she felt very sorry for Randell. But she must not forget about the sorcerer, who was actually very carefully controlling everything that was happening around him. He must not be allowed to sense the use of dark magic nearby, even if it was being used for good purposes. Now she had to appear to be a good, normal person, incapable of using magic. The head maid approached and asked the lady to follow her, as everyone was waiting for her. The Duke and his wife did not understand what the woman was talking about. They looked at each other in surprise, and the guests came to both of them at once. The butler and the housekeeper were waiting for them in the hall. Almost all the servants were gathered there as well. The servants greeted their new mistress and her husband. It seemed that every subject, even the children, loved the Duke. Randell asked the butler, whose name was Belffort, why they were meeting Sylvia near the infirmary. Thelma, the housekeeper, came to her husband's aid. She said that they had been waiting for the wounded knight. Sylvia thought about how motivated the Duke's servants and subjects were. This meant something. She addressed those present and said that she was very pleased to meet them. She hoped that they would have a good relationship in the future. The butler and housekeeper were delighted with their mistress's attitude. They showed her to her room. The room that had been set aside for the young Duchess had once belonged to the old Duke's wife. All the furnishings would be replaced with new ones. Even the portrait depicting the current Duke's parents and himself would be replaced. Instead, a painting of Sylvie and her husband would be commissioned. The girl thought that she had once met Randall's parents. No matter how long she lived, Alice was forced to be reborn again and again. After all, she couldn't just die. Her memories wouldn't let her live in peace, and she carried all her memories and thoughts of the past within her. Once, when she fled defenselessly from a village attacked by monsters, Alice came across a man and a woman fighting the beasts with swords in their hands. The girl came to their aid and drove the attackers away with magic. Alice warned them that travelers should not venture into such places in such small numbers. The defender pointed the couple in the direction of the road that led to the nearest town. Finally, the strangers asked her to tell them her name. The girl asked them not to tell anyone that they had seen her. And just then, Sylvia remembered how skillfully those people had wielded their weapons. And although their clothes were torn and dirty, they were quite richly tailored. These were the people from the portrait. The housekeeper was surprised at how intently the girl was looking at the portrait. Sylvia herself thought that the child she had saved back then had now become her husband. It was difficult to comprehend and finally understand. It seemed like a joke. The young Duchess was taking a bath. The maid who was helping her took great care of the girl and was very concerned about her. They tried in every way to please the girl. Rumors had already spread about the poor health of the new mistress. The girl praised the maids. They were very happy. One of them said frankly that she had initially accepted Sylvia because of her incomparable beauty, thinking she was a demon. The Duchess asked in confusion if she was really that beautiful. The maid assured her that she would be very happy if she could live even one day with such a beautiful face. But the bride was now thinking about how she would behave on her first night with her husband. She believed that she had to do everything well and very quickly. And she was afraid that Randell would turn out to be a pervert. This frightened her very much. In that case, she would have to put him to sleep very quickly. But that would happen without fail. Sylvia thought she could manage it in an hour. Her hair was perfectly combed. The girl put on her most beautiful robe, bathed, and smelled nice. In any case, her husband had to be satisfied. Sylvia entered the room. She noticed that the Duke was in very good physical shape. The man asked if they could sit down and talk. The girl replied that since she was already there, of course they could. Randell sat down right next to his wife. He thought that the girl had already been through a lot today, so she should be allowed to rest. But this wedding was by imperial decree, and marital duties had to be fulfilled. His wife began to undress the Duke. He stopped her and asked what she was doing. Sylvia looked at Belffort in surprise. She told him to continue talking while she undressed him. The Duke asked what his wife wanted from him and why she was taking off his robe. Randell looked a little confused. Sylvia asked if it was not their duty to spend their wedding night together so that their hearts could unite. The Duke assured her that he felt burdened by the word duty. He didn't want it to feel like coercion. That wasn't what he wanted. The girl replied that it didn't bother her, but she didn't really want to do it either. Randell said that the problem might be that she didn't like him. His wife said that she liked him very much. He asked her to get off him because this position was too much for a start. Sylvia suggested switching places. The girl realized that she had blurted it out. She openly told her husband that she liked him because he was very handsome and beautiful. Sylvia thought she had disgraced herself in front of the Duke and said something she shouldn't have. She changed her mind and said she wouldn't do anything. And now she would get off her husband. And then his wife lost consciousness. Randell thought that this could be the result of her encounter with the demons. However, poor health could also have contributed to this. The girl was of noble birth, and she could have been disturbed by the cruelty of today's attack. Moreover, the most seriously wounded in the battle was right next to her. She saw every detail of the fight. Sylvia fell asleep right on top of her husband. At first, Randell wanted to call the butler, but then he realized that it would look very strange. So he decided to leave everything as it was, even though it was very close for a first time. The girl woke up at dawn. She asked if they had done what they had agreed. Randell replied that he still had a conscience and honor not to touch a sleeping woman to do business. Sylvia was lying on top of her husband. The Duke suggested they talk, but it was awkward to do so in that position. He asked his wife to move aside and get off him. The girl replied that she hadn't meant anything by it. Finally, the lovers sat down at the table. Too many dishes had been prepared for breakfast. The Duke said that he had ordered so much healthy food to be prepared. After all, the Duchess had been tired the previous day and needed to replenish her energy. He also told the servants not to come into the room so as not to distract or disturb Sylvia while she was eating. The girl was surprised, thinking that they thought she was some kind of very hungry girl. This made her a little uncomfortable, but she was even more upset that nothing serious had happened yesterday. She had fallen asleep right on top of him, without even waiting for him to lie down next to her. She also thought that he thought she was a lamb that needed to be fattened up. The girl asked Randell directly when their wedding night would be, as it had not happened yesterday. He repeated that he did not want her to do it under duress. He could not just use her like that. Sylvia asked what she should do when people started pressuring her and saying what kind of woman she was because she and her husband had not consummated their marriage. The Duke assured her that no one would dare say such a thing to her, and any gossip about it would be punished. Alice thought that people had even rejected her, who was ready to do anything for humanity. A normal couple had to fulfill their marriage vows, and the girl couldn't do that on the first night they spent together. And would there be any guarantees that no one would gossip about it? From the outside, it seemed a little naive and strange. There was no point in pretending. The girl decided to tell him everything about her life, or rather, about all the lives she had lived before. Now she had to die a normal death, but to do that, she had to play the role of a good wife and a suitable partner before God. And so Sylvia offered a deal that would benefit everyone. The only condition was that the Duke had to hasten her death. And Randell had said that he couldn't spend the night with someone he didn't like or love, so they would have to fall in love with each other. And to start with, they would have to get used to touching each other. Therefore, he had to allow her to touch him whenever Sylvia wanted to. This sounded strange and confused the Duke, but the girl quickly added that she was ready to fulfill all his desires. Randell asked where exactly his wife wanted to touch him. Sylvia replied that since it was their first time, they could start with his hands. The man calmed down and gave her permission to do so. There was nothing too much about it. The Duchess said that he had decided to do it sooner than she had expected. So she asked if there was anything else he wanted instead, and Belffort couldn't resist telling her to eat something healthy, even if it was disgusting. The girl looked into the bowl and wondered how he could think of such a thing. It would have been better if his desire had been for something indecent, but not this. It was too much for the first time. She couldn't stand healthy food. They were walking through the park. Sylvia still couldn't get over the healthy food, and the guy just stared at her. His wife couldn't believe that such a cruel and insidious nature was hidden behind her husband's appearance. Instead, the girl told her husband to take her by the hand. This would be a good sign for their future plans. And people would talk less nonsense when they saw that everything was fine with the couple. Belffort realized that if Sylvia turned out to be the king's spy, he would be able to keep an eye on her, since she would always be by his side. It wasn't such a bad deal at first glance. He felt a little guilty, but trusting a girl he had known for less than a week would be really strange. And then he remembered that all his vassals would arrive in 3 days. That meant there would be a ball and a formal reception. The Duke assured her that she need not worry. His servants and allies were very nervous about how to behave in the presence of their lord's wife. But they still wanted to meet them both. In any case, it would be a small banquet and he would not keep them long. Thelma and Wilcott would help. The housekeeper would help Lady Belffort herself, and the butler would provide everything necessary for the reception. The girl thought that usually the preparation for a reception was the responsibility of the lady of the castle. She remembered that she had done this in one of her past lives, so she must have retained some skills. And she was ready for it. She promised her husband that she would do everything in her power to fulfill her duties. The Duke said that in that case, he had to do his part and leave his wife. They would see each other in the evening. On the outskirts of the town where the Duke's palace was located, a group of knights encountered the boys they had found in the forest during their battle with the demonic creatures. The children were delighted when the men noticed them. The Duke himself asked each of them how they were feeling. After listening to the boys, Belffort asked them not to wander into dangerous places anymore, but to play in designated areas within the city or in their yard. The little boy replied that they would not go into the forest anymore. The children did not usually play there, but that time, for some reason, they had wandered into the thicket. The Duke asked what had happened that time that the children had broken the established rule. The boy said that his father and mother were upset because the grass had been destroyed, and the animals might go hungry the following year. So the boys decided to go into the forest to see if there were any clearings with lush grass. Randell said he was simply amazed by the courage and determination of the children who wanted to help their parents. But next time, they shouldn't behave like that, and should just ask the adults to go with them to explore. Belffort thought about how the fields of grass for the animals could have been destroyed when there was a forest nearby. Knights often raided the forest to scare away monsters and regularly destroyed them. In order not to torment himself with fruitless thoughts and groundless suspicions, he had to go himself and check the borders of the village and the area around it. He couldn't risk people's lives so carelessly. The Duke gathered all his most powerful knights. He told them about their mission to patrol the forest. Dangerous animals under demonic influence, as well as monsters and demons themselves, could be found in the forest. It was impossible to be safe in this place and lower your weapons until you were sure that the barrier was working properly and reliably. The knights answered in unison and set off to check the forest thickets. When everyone had left and Randell was alone, an unpleasant feeling came over him. Whether it was because there was no one around or because there had been no people in the forest for a long time, the place seemed eerie to him. Meanwhile, the knights had passed through part of the forest. Usually, the points where the magic crystals were located were in order. 4 of the 5 stones were fine. Only 1 stone remained, located in the center of the forest. The Duke personally led the group to the center of the forest. And he was right to be worried. The last of the stones was cracked. Dark energy had deformed it, which meant that there was a huge hole in the defense that needed to be closed immediately. The knights were attacked by a demon that took the form of a huge snake. The entire group of knights would not have been strong enough to fight it, so Belffort ordered them to flee and save their lives. The snake could not crawl beyond the range of the stone. At that moment, Sylvia was drinking tea in the palace. She stopped abruptly when the cup in her hand cracked. The distraught girl thought that something terrible had happened. The young duchess did not yet know the danger her husband was in. Randell fought off the attack of the last of the monsters. He single-handedly killed a whole herd of demonic reptiles. Fortunately, apart from 2 bites, no one else was hurt. The Duke ordered the wounded to be taken to the castle. The rest of the detachment would continue. Belffort examined the stone. It had been cut. The cut was very careful. It did not look like it had been made by an unintelligent monster. It was too careful and precise. But there was no sign of demons either. The Duke realized that a dark parasite had infiltrated the forest. It was a monster that had once been a normal human being. But having renounced its humanity, the parasite had turned to the dark side. The people were ordered to send messengers to all the Duke's vassals demanding lists of peasants and townspeople who had recently left their estates. The traitors and demon worshippers had to be found before they could do any harm. Telma was giving the new mistress a tour of the banquet hall. She said that the king had specially sent his best engineers to build this hall and the castle in general. As a result, the castle had become so beautiful. To the girl, however, the castle did not seem so ancient. Perhaps this was because it had only recently been renovated. Due to frequent visits from vassals and subjects from other lands, the hall was kept very clean. The woman said that a merchant was due to arrive soon, bringing everything necessary for the ball. Therefore, Sylvia had to take care of preparing the hall for the arrival of the distinguished guests herself. And she had to do it properly. The chief merchant, Jerkil, arrived at the Duchess's residence. His name was Chat Hekla. The man noted that the mistress of the castle was a real beauty. The girl asked him to sit down and rest, as the merchant had traveled such a long way. But money was more important to him than various conventions. The merchant decided to extract as much money as possible from the foolish young aristocrat. This time, he was expecting a good catch. He began to talk about the high-quality goods he had brought with him. The hall, decorated with his goods and materials, was intended to impress everyone present with its wealth and sophistication. The aristocrat sat and looked at the sketches of the materials offered to her by the merchant. The maids gathered around her whispered with interest and praised the goods. Sylvia was overcome with uneasiness and suspicion. The moment had come to make a decision. The girl asked how much the materials would cost. The merchant replied that, considering the intention to decorate the entire banquet hall, the materials and their delivery would cost 30 gold coins. Silence fell. Sylvia asked if something had happened. The housekeeper replied that this amount was half of Belfort's monthly income. The girl remembered that the Duke helped all those affected by the monster attack. Therefore, she thought it would be difficult to allocate such a sum. 30 gold coins was a lot for this kind of expense. The housekeeper asked the merchant to lower the price or offer something less expensive. The man was angry. He asked the women if they knew how difficult it was for a trade caravan to reach the north due to frequent attacks by demons and monsters. And now it turned out that he had to risk his life for nothing. Moreover, he was already offering his goods at a fairly low price. The housekeeper asked if he would accept payment in installments in that case. But Sylvia stopped her. She asked Chuck to stop and wait a little. She said she had seen these goods 2 months before her wedding in the capital. It was possible that the materials had gone out of fashion in the big cities and were no longer in demand, and the merchant was trying to sell them in the provinces for good money. The man justified himself by saying that it took him some time to get to the duchy. During this period, the materials had lost some of their novelty, but were still the latest fashion. The girl doubted this. The merchant pretended to be offended by Sylvia's words and assumptions. After all, he was the same Chuck Hatla. But the girl did not lose her composure. She said that the merchant could not point out the wife of Duke Belffort and the daughter of Count Floretta. She warned that if there was even a grain of truth in his words, the merchant would become the enemy of 2 families, the Florets and the Belforts. Therefore, he should think about the consequences of his words. The punishment would be equal to that for disrespecting the king's family. Sylvia pretended that she believed Chuck and had no doubt that her husband was not crazy enough to get himself into such trouble. Chuck's nerves couldn't take it. When he realized what kind of trouble he was getting himself into, he changed his mind. Hatla said that the price of 15 gold coins was quite acceptable to him. Chuck did not mention the reasons that made him change his mind. But no one was interested in that. Everyone was happy and thanked Sylvia for her wise approach. When the Duke arrived at the castle and learned of the agreement his wife had made, he immediately decided to thank her. But the housekeeper said that the Duchess was asleep. Belffort was not very happy about this, but he did not insist. The Duke quietly approached the sleeping woman. He decided to lie down quietly next to her. He had to be very quiet. Randall thought that she was not like someone who had always lived at home and had no contact with the outside world. Suddenly, Sylvia hugged her husband. He asked what she was doing. The girl said that this is how love should begin, with tender touches and caresses. The Duchess asked why he didn't want to do this. The Duke thought what a strange woman he had come across. His suggestions for the day were limited to simply sleeping. He wanted to rest after a hard day spent searching in the woods, but Sylvia fell asleep first. The Duke was reading a report. The man who had handed it to him wondered if Belffort had even tried to understand what the document was about. The aristocrat looked very distracted and was only glancing at the paper. The man respected Belffort, but his recent behavior was very annoying and tiresome. The Duke's appearance was more like that of a dog. The stranger asked why the Duke was still smiling. Randell said he hoped his smile wasn't visible, but it was impossible to remember what had happened that morning without smiling. At breakfast, Sylvia refused to eat any of the good, healthy food. But the Duke knew what to do. He promised his wife that if she ate the food on the table, he would hold her hand. But when she refused, saying that there weren't enough hands, Randall promised her a hug. The plates were emptied very quickly. Sylvia believed that this was the price for the next night, for which she had plans. Sometimes he did not understand his wife, who seemed unaware or unwilling to understand what a wedding night was. These thoughts distracted him from reading the report. The stranger tried to get the attention of his lord, who was behaving strangely. Randell was thinking more about his age and its advantages and disadvantages than about the information in the document. The man asked what to do if Sylvia turned out to be a spy for the king. The Duke replied menacingly that the man was free to think whatever he wanted, but he should not slander his wife. After all, careless words could cost him dearly. The magician apologized for his language. He promised that he would never again allow such thoughts to enter his head in the presence of the Duke. Randell ordered him not to mention it again. It would be better to think about strengthening the force barrier. The sorcerer replied that this would require a stone much larger than any previous ones. He could do it himself, but it would be very difficult. Therefore, he demanded more money from the Duke. When the Duke finally agreed to allocate money from the treasury to the magician to strengthen the defenses, he replied that he was ready to do everything in his power and asked to be trusted. Belffort was pleased with the start of the day. Sylvia was going to her room. She was accompanied by her housekeeper. The woman assured her that the mistress had no more business for her today. At the same time, she praised her dress, in which she looked absolutely fantastic. The girl thought about how many dresses she had already tried on before the banquet. Selva assured her that Sylvia would look beautiful in any dress, so there was no point in trying on so many dresses and choosing so carefully. Sylvia believed that everything had ended so quickly, only because she had finally made her own choice and come to her own decision. In the garden, the girl suddenly saw the magician lying in the middle of the lawn, among a pile of discarded letters. The housekeeper saw Austin and pounced on him. She was tired of the magician often lying around in different places in the castle, scaring the servants and guests. And now he had frightened the new mistress of the castle. It seemed that the magician was not listening to her. He complained that it was too noisy around him. He was too intelligent and well-mannered to fall asleep wherever he happened to be. So he asked her not to disturb him while he was lying there doing his work. Thelma did not listen to the wizard. She said that Sylvia could go to her chambers and that the housekeeper would clean up the garden herself so that it would not scare others. The wizard was outraged at being called a commoner, but the Duke's wife asked the housekeeper to leave her alone with the wizard. She had something to tell him. The knowledge that had emerged from her past life pointed to what Austin was really doing here. The magician was suspicious of the girl's proposal. Deep down, he still did not rule out the possibility that Sylvia was a spy for the king. And it was not worth telling her every little detail. The sorcerer lay on the ground and wrote something on the sheets of paper in front of him. The girl asked if he was writing a strengthening formula. She noticed that the magician was referring to and using a formula developed by Alice. After a short while, Austin shouted something. It was difficult to understand the result, but the sorcerer seemed to have managed to write the formula. But suddenly, he became concerned that if he failed or made a mistake, He would have to repeat the calculation. Sylvia understood that she had nothing to do with the formula now. She felt sorry for the wizard, but now she couldn't afford to show weakness and help him in his affairs. It could arouse additional suspicion. A strange chain of thoughts flashed through the girl's mind. If the sorcerer succeeded, the magical protection would be strengthened. The knights would be able to respond much more quickly to threats, and thus the likelihood of dying in an accident would be low. The duke's wife asked the magician if she could look at his calculations. When he protested, she said that her father was the vice dean of the University of Elvaris. Therefore, she had minimal knowledge of magic. There were few things she had not heard or read about, although she gave the impression of an uneducated and illiterate beauty who thought only about dresses and other nonsense. But she soon became disappointed in the formula. According to the housekeeper and many other people close to the Duke, Austin was considered the only great magician. Of course, everyone said that he was the strongest after Alice, but there were many mistakes in the formula. Austin was not thrilled that someone had meddled in his notes. He said that when he was studying, he also had the imprudence to help people, but soon he grew out of it. And the girl could ruin the formula if she drew something extra there, but everything was written correctly on the girl's letter. Sylvia was about to leave, leaving the magician alone. But before she went, she asked him not to tell the Duke about it. It was not necessary for her husband to know about her abilities. But the wizard was against it. He couldn't believe that the girl could just figure out the secret formula like that, and no one could be told about it. Then he remembered his promise to Belffort, and the money that would be allocated to Austin. The wizard simply could not complain to the Duke. His suspicions would remain with him. However, he could not allow himself to be outdone by some girl, even if her father was the vice-chancellor of the most famous university in the kingdom. Meanwhile, the Duke was getting ready for a reception that was to take place that evening. Randell was worried that his wife would be waiting too long for him, but his assistant said that they had almost finished the preparations and everything was ready. The butler asked the Duke to look in the mirror. Randell felt that today he was much more confident than he had been before. Today he would definitely succeed with his lady, because Belffort had never been confident in his appearance. The man could hardly wait to see his Sylvia. Today he was to wear the crown of victory and act with confidence. After all, his wife was so beautiful. Everyone around him was in awe of him. In her chambers, Sylvia was also preparing for the reception. However, her preparations were more meticulous and thorough. She was surrounded by a crowd of maids who admired their mistress. Their eyes seemed to glow with excitement. One of the maids asked for a minute to stay with Lady Belffort. Those present said they wanted to spend at least a second with such a beauty. She was the most beautiful girl they had ever met. Sylvia herself was not so happy. She had lost track of time at the gathering. The girl did not share the servants' enthusiasm. She had never been able to squeal, but that did not make her any less feminine or beautiful. One of the maids announced the arrival of the Duke. The maid said that they had one last chance to show their mistress to the Duke. Sylvia didn't like this even more. At moments like this, she felt like a doll. And this was only the beginning. What awaited her in the future, when the Duke held balls? Finally, she entered the hall to meet her husband. Randell was speechless with happiness and surprise. Sylvia asked him to forgive her for being late. But her husband did not care. He was so captivated by her beauty that he lost the power of speech. The girl asked if she should come to the bedroom tonight in this dress, since the Duke liked it so much. The question confused the Duke. He didn't know how to answer without sounding like a servant, but also without offending Sylvia. Those present in the hall looked at the Duke and his wife with admiration and amazement. The greetings were sincere and heartfelt. Men and women were struck by the Duchess's beauty. For a moment, silence reigned. Randell thanked the lords who had come to the palace to celebrate their wedding and resolve important matters of state. Belffort introduced his wife and said that everyone would serve her as they served him. The aristocrats greeted her with applause. They said it was a great honor to serve such a famous and distinguished family. They wished them many years of married life and hoped they would soon have children and raise them well. The noblewomen said that the couple looked like a fairy tale prince and princess. Everyone had heard about how handsome Duke Belffort was, but no one could believe that his wife was so beautiful. People thought that the Duke and his wife were very well suited to each other. The unknown woman thought that she should not be so concerned about the Duke's current family, even though he was close to the royal family. The Duke met with the Marquis of Sakrin. Both were very happy to see each other. Randell asked how the Marquis had been lately, and whether Phil had come with them. But the Marquis noted with regret that Phil had not yet returned from the south, where he had gone to war. The Marquis added that the boy had always been a daredevil, and now it was worth worrying whether he would become a normal person after returning from the military campaign in the south. In addition, rumors spoke of the imminent end of the war in the south. The Blood Prince was also there, leading his troops into battle against the demons and their followers. From the outside, it seemed that the Duke and the Marquis were very good friends. But in reality, it was clear that Randell did not need this. Her husband tried to remain human in any situation. He was not interested in discussing matters of state and royal rule. He simply fulfilled his duty to protect the people, and that was all. An unknown lady approached Sylvia. She greeted the Duchess. The woman's name was Rubia Gleber. In the Duchess's opinion, this woman had something to say. Such people sometimes become blinded after surpassing themselves in loyalty to their masters. Sylvia immediately disliked Rubea. The woman's gaze was deep and seemed to penetrate to the very heart, disturbing everything most secret there, and as if lifting it from the depths for all to see, mocking desires and secrets. The stranger asked if the Duchess knew how much trouble their marriage had caused in the north of the kingdom. Her expression was very serious. The current Duke needed strength and power to raise the duchy, and marriage was a good way to expand his influence and power. Some of her relatives were the most loyal vassals of His Majesty the King, but how much could they help the Duke with military force in the war? Finally, Rubia said that any girl who had more influence and whose family was more influential in the political arena and in the military could find herself in her place. After all, personal qualities did not matter here. What mattered was power. Sylvia thought that this woman wanted to be with the Duke, therefore she should be wary of her. But now was not the time to show weakness and insecurity. In such a situation, she could not remain a weak woman. Each of the opponents believed that her rival should show a sign of weakness, whether it was a desire to fall to the floor or burst into tears. Public opinion would change dramatically towards the one who showed weakness of spirit. Sylvia asked the woman what she should do now. Rubia did not understand the question. The Duke's wife asked if she should give up her love just because some upstart told her to. The girl asked if Rubia knew that neither she nor Randell had initiated their marriage, and therefore accusing her of forcibly taking a man for herself was irrelevant. It meant going against His Majesty's will. Their confrontation was interrupted by the appearance of a pentagram on the ceiling. The magical symbol glowed with dark energy. A monster resembling a large octopus began to emerge from it. People scattered in all directions. But amid all this chaos, Sylvia stood alone before the dangerous monster, which had somehow found its way into the hall. Randell shouted at his wife to run away from the creature. But at that moment, the girl realized that she could die at any second. Without a doubt, she could end her life at that moment. All she had to do was take one more step toward her doom. But Rubia grabbed her by the arm. The woman screamed that she had to get away, not stand in front of the monster. Rubea did not manage to escape from the monster. Instead, Sylvia covered her with her own body. A bloody wound spread across her back. Blood spurted in all directions. The Duke's wife fainted and fell to the floor. Sylvia woke up in Alice's body. A boy was sitting next to her. The girl asked him his name, but the boy sat silently. The girl asked insistently, because she remembered perfectly well how they had met for the first time. The boy said his name was Cleon. The girl suggested that he go with her, but the boy refused, just like last time. However, he thought about whether to go or not, because she had once saved him from death. Since then, Cleon had been her faithful sidekick. But were her memories correct? Was this child really the hero Cleon who had saved the world? She wondered if her memories were deceiving her. Could she have imagined it all again? Sylvia lay on the bed. Her mind was confused. The girl wondered again if Cleon was really Leo, whom she had met. After all, it was he who had finally defeated the devil Alice. The Duke's voice interrupted her thoughts. The man had been sitting next to her all night. He asked her how his wife was feeling. The girl tried to get up, but he stopped her. Although the sorcerer had healed her wound, it was too early for her to get up, as there could be consequences. But Sylvia resisted his order. She believed that now was not the time to lie in bed. She noticed that her husband was crying. This surprised her greatly, and he did not want her to see it. The Duchess wondered why he was putting her in an awkward position. She didn't want him to think that the Duchess would be with him forever. But no matter what happened, Randell always looked only at her. It seemed that he saw nothing but her, and when he looked at her with such an open gaze, she began to have doubts. Her husband was too kind, and she didn't want to hurt herself anymore. The girl wasn't ready to die yet. Sylvia asked if she could ask her husband to share his warmth with her. Today, she didn't have the strength to bargain, so she just wanted to warm up from the cold that reigned in the rooms. Belffort hesitated. It didn't start like the last time. The man hugged his wife tightly. She responded to his caresses. But at that moment, he told her that after he killed the monster, he sent a letter to her family, the Forets, because they needed to know about the attack. But Randell added that the security system restored by Austin was not yet ready. So in the letter, he asked the Count and his wife not to rush to travel north, due to the possibility of an attack by demons and their supporters. The girl felt tired, but she was ready to stay with this man. However, the Duke said that he had decided to send her back to her parents for a while. Austin would, of course, complain that he had no more mana left. However, the county was close enough to the kingdom's capital, so they would try to move the girl quickly, from one bed to another. Such a journey should not harm Sylvia or worsen her condition. The girl could not understand what her husband was talking about. Randell said that the north was a very dangerous place. Therefore, it was necessary to hide his wife away from possible attack. It was not a suitable place to live. His intention to send Sylvia to her parents' estate in Floretta was final. He was very concerned about how his wife would feel. After all, they had only recently married, and he already wanted to send her home. Sylvia looked closely at her husband's face. It showed that the decision to send her home had been very difficult. It had been preceded by long deliberations and weighing all the pros and cons. But for her, it was close to death. She had grown so accustomed to her husband. She had fallen deeply in love with him. And now this man was sending her back to her parents' estate. She told him that in that case, not everyone would accept her as a duchess, and that would threaten his status. Belffort said that no one would dare to raise the issue. The question also arose as to who would perform the duties of the castle's mistress. The Duke replied that before the wedding, he had decided these matters himself. So now, he would return to this arrangement. The Duke blamed himself for the attack during the banquet. He had become very relaxed after the wedding and lost his vigilance. And so, no one knew who had begun to worship the cult of demons and helped them expand into the human world. He said that he did not care what those around him would say, because he had used his powers to cover up the fact that Sylvia was a spy sent by the king. But he had missed the moment when the attack on his estate was being prepared, and he alone was to blame for that. His wife embraced the Duke. She firmly stated that this was her home, and she was not prepared to leave. She enjoyed the north. The servants and subordinates obeyed her. She also appreciated them. However, she loved her husband, whom she had fallen deeply in love with, the most. It so happened that the Duke pushed his beloved away. He was not ready to have sex with her. He was not ready to do something bad to a sick person. Therefore, he had to pull himself together. After all, there was still work to be done. After the battle with the monster, Endem searched the entire hall and found an engraved object that could move objects or living beings from place to place. Belffort gave one last chance to confess to those who were involved. If the culprit was ready to come forward and confess what they had done, the Duke would put an end to it all with a single gesture. But if the criminal was not ready to face punishment now, Randell would find them. The Marquise said that the precious stone was attached to her dress, but she did not know that she was wearing such a powerful artifact. She certainly had no bad intentions or evil designs against the Duchess. The stone got tangled in the lace of her dress. Rubea didn't notice it and accidentally carried the stone into the hall, opening a portal to the monster. The Duke couldn't believe it. Suspicions swirled in his head. A friend of the woman said that she could easily be suspected of organizing the attack. However, the girl replied that she would rather share useful information about the details of the attack than hide anything and put Belffort in danger. She went on to say that when the monster attacked Sylvia, Rubia tore her dress to bandage the Duchess's wounds, who had heroically rushed to the woman's defense, even though there was a conflict between them. After that, Rubia noticed a stone that had fallen at her feet. In all the commotion, she simply hadn't paid attention to it. But then she thought it might be a magical object, not a precious stone. And while everyone was focused on the aristocrat, one of the guests belatedly accused a servant. The man pointed to a young boy who had apparently pulled the stone out of his mouth before the monster appeared. The prosecution demanded that the boy be interrogated and that all the details of the assassination attempt organized by the young man be clarified. The man himself said that he had nothing to do with the events that had just taken place, but that didn't help. The vassal who had accused his servant was also arrested. He was afraid to tell the truth right away, lest he also be suspected of organizing the attack on the Duchess and the banquet guests. For the servant, it all ended with his head being cut off. Before his punishment, he managed to say a few words. The young man told how hard times were and how a stranger on the street had offered him a lot of money for his services. The Duke realized that the servant had met one of the traitors who had sold their souls to the demons. It was necessary to expose the network of spies and agents of the dark forces as soon as possible. They had to act quickly. The maids surrounded Sylvia. They were all talking and rejoicing that their mistress was finally safe. Her condition after the attack was improving, thanks to the efforts of the Duke himself. And the servants made a doll that looked like the Duchess. The girl replied that thanks to Austen's magic, she felt much better. Although it should be noted that even in good times, she did not look entirely healthy. Sylvia thanked the servants for their care and went to her room. The girls assured her that they would not let anyone hurt their mistress, and she, in turn, should not worry about her safety. From now on, they would all be responsible for the Duchess. Sylvia did not expect such treatment from the servants. For lunch, the servants served a selection of healthy foods, specially prepared for the Duchess. Everyone around tried to please the young lady and help her recover as quickly as possible. The girls wished their mistress bon appetit. During a walk with the housekeeper, the Duchess said that she felt sick and nauseous. The woman asked if her mistress had eaten anything bad. It could also have been caused by feeling unwell after the attack. Sylvia was still thinking about why it was Rubia who had given her first aid. As just moments before the unfortunate incident, they had been arguing and trying to humiliate each other in front of all the guests. At first glance, her behavior seemed strange. It is possible that the woman was protecting her own interests in this way, but it is difficult to say what her motives were at that time. However, when she lost consciousness, Rubia's father rushed to her. He ordered his daughter to leave. Suddenly, Lady Rubia approached Sylvia. She asked how the Duchess was feeling. The Duchess thanked her, because thanks to Rubia's help, the girl had survived. Death had threatened the poor girl. The rescuer told Sylvia that she was very happy about the Duchess's improved health. She hoped that the Duke's wife would soon return to her family estate, as the North was too dangerous a place for her. After Rubia said this, she ran away from Sylvia with the housekeeper. The women looked after the fugitive and wondered if magic had been used or if the girl was very ashamed. Thelma said that it was more likely that she was ashamed. Sylvia asked if she could ask Thelma something. The woman agreed. The girl asked how close Lady Rubea's father was to Duke Belffort. Thelma did not answer right away. The housekeeper told a story that took place many years ago. At that time, a dispute arose in the royal family over who would become the heir to the throne. But neither prince wanted to start a war that would harm the kingdom. One of them renounced the throne in favor of his opponent. But the latter replied that he could not accept his offer because he did not know what to do with the vassals who had sided with his opponent. Both found themselves in a difficult situation again. But one of the princes said that he had decided to go to the north of the country. His rival forgot about everything. He asked him not to resort to such drastic measures to resolve the issue, but the man was determined. He believed that this was the most appropriate and effective way. Moreover, the north was like a wasteland, and it needed to be restored. and the people who lived there protected. And the prince could change something there. Thus, the prince who set off for the north renounced the surname Lachlan. Instead, he took the surname Belffort, and he was the father of the current Duke, Randell Belffort. And then he managed to unite the aristocrats and the warring factions. Probably, the then Duke of Belfort was able to melt the harsh hearts of the northern nobility with his desire to fight against demons and wage war against the enemies of the people who threatened the northern borders of the kingdom. Good times came, but the Duke and his wife were killed in battle with a monster. For little Randall, it was a terrible tragedy that greatly changed the boy's character. He became the last pretender to the throne of the kingdom. The Council of Lords decided that the young Duke could not rule. At that time, the North needed a wise ruler and a great commander. And until the young Duke reached the required age, a lord chosen by the council would rule. The person who proposed this idea was immediately suspected of wanting to become a usurper. Little Randall witnessed the conversation of the lords of the North and remembered their words and the things they talked about for a long time. Sometime later, an incident occurred. The little Duke came to his court all battered and with a severed hand that looked like a human one. Those present were frightened by what might have happened to the boy. But Randall said that he was now also needed and useful to the people. Then the people rose up against the lords who, taking advantage of the young Duke's position, were robbing and exploiting the population. The people supported Randell and made him the true ruler of the northern lands. As a result, the king confirmed Randell's status as Duke and ruler of the North. And then he was able to take control of all the lords and vassals of this part of the kingdom. Since then, he has defended the people from tyranny and monsters. The king could not fully trust the Duke for a long time. For about 10 years, he constantly summoned Belfort to his court, under the pretext of making him friends with the king's daughter. But the goal was to keep the powerful vassal close. One of those who helped the Duke unite the aristocrats was the Marquis of Gleber. He always stood guard over Belfort's interests and supported him in the most difficult times. Randall could safely count on the Marquis. Sylvia thanked him for the information. She had thought that the Duke had grown up in an atmosphere of love and trust. But now, everything was clear. She had been very wrong in her guesses and predictions. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. Now it was clear why the Marquis and his daughter enjoyed such authority with the Duke. The wife speculated that the Marquis could have been a traitor and that it was his actions that had damaged one of the protective stones. She could tell her husband about the betrayal. However, she did not know how he would react to his wife's words. She had lived many lives, and she was no longer surprised by betrayal or other base deeds of people. And the Duke might not believe her words. The wife was concerned about her husband's fate and condition. Randall might not believe her words, or it could turn him against his old ally, whom he had considered his most loyal and faithful friend for many years. The girl called out to him. The man did not understand what she wanted. He slowly walked over to the doctor. Sylvia reminded him that he had promised not to cover himself with a blanket when they were embracing. She wanted to believe that the Duke would not break his word. Suddenly, she threw herself at her husband. He was surprised by his wife's behavior. Sylvia promised that she would not do anything strange or terrible to him. However, Randell asked if it wasn't strange. Then what was it? His wife looked at the Duke's back. It was covered in scars. They were old, but it was their number that disturbed her most. The girl could not even imagine what had happened to her husband and what he had to endure in order not to lose his status. Randell assured her that he was fine. However, she shouldn't look so sad. Deep down, he wanted to rejoice, because the girl was genuinely concerned about his fate. But at the same time, he didn't want Sylvia to be sad. Meanwhile, the knights repaired the damaged stones that protected the Duke's lands. They had about 10 left. One of the knights asked the sorcerer if he could ask him a question. The magician said that 1 minute cost 1 coin. The Duke promised to pay upon his return. The sorcerer agreed. Randall said that the question was for his friend, not for him. Austin replied that he didn't care. The essence of the question was that his friend had a girlfriend who was a real beauty. However, it seemed that his friend was not interested in anything else but her body, and she behaved in the same way. But his friend loved her very much. However, he was not satisfied with her behavior. Austin asked if his friend really loved her. The wizard said that if the Duke's friend didn't love his beloved, then there was no point in worrying about it. And then Randell wondered if he loved Sylvia. The answer was obvious. He loved her with all his heart and was ready to do anything for her. He felt his heart warm at the thought that the girl cared about him, his affairs, and constantly paid attention to him. But he was sorry that Sylvia was only interested in his body. It was hurtful and unfair. The Duke understood that every action of his beloved resonated in his heart and filled him with joy. A smile never left his face, even though he sometimes looked like an idiot. He couldn't believe that he loved her. Realizing his place and his feelings, he understood that he had to act. He should start with gifts for his beloved. No matter how life turned out, according to the magician, people often fall in love with those who give them gifts. This was just Austin's opinion, but the more expensive the gift, the more a person fell in love with their companion. The sorcerer noticed how the Duke looked at him. The look was scornful, but the magician believed that the gift showed his feelings very well. Therefore, a win-win strategy was to stay close to her and shower her with gifts until she became interested not only in his body, but also in his heart. This would require a lot of effort, but it would be worth it. The Duchess came to visit Lady Rubia. The lady did not expect such a visit, but it was easy to guess what had brought the Duchess to her. Sylvia said that the weather was actually very nice, and she had no one to walk with. Rubia replied that she did not feel comfortable in the company of the wife of the Duke of Belffort, to which Sylvia asked if saving the Marquis's daughter's life was not enough reason for friendship and reconciliation. The lady asked her to wait. She had to pay tribute to her savior. After that, the women strolled through the streets of the city and talked about everything. Over time, the conversation flowed naturally, and it seemed that a friendship had blossomed. At one of the street corners, a man and a woman approached Lady Rubia. They greeted the aristocrat politely. However, she was not happy to see them. This couple often met her at the local market and said that she was like a daughter to them. This annoyed and confused the proud and haughty girl, but the husband and wife asked her not to take their words to heart. The girl blushed and glanced at her companion. The lady asked the Duchess how she felt about such crowded places. Apologizing to Sylvia, the lady said that she also belonged to one of the ruling families of the North, and therefore, by communicating with ordinary people, she was fulfilling her duty to protect and care for the people living on her lands. The Duke's wife was pleasantly surprised by Lady Rubia's behavior and way of thinking, but the aristocrat herself, the daughter of a marquis, did not consider this worthy of praise or admiration. In her opinion, ordinary people did not deserve respect. As a sign of reconciliation, the Duke's wife bought a butterfly brooch from a jewelry store. Rubia refused the gift, but Sylvia insisted that she accept this modest gift as a sign of friendship. The girl thanked her for the gift. The Duchess noticed that when the lady felt like a child or something similar, she looked very cute, and she suggested that they continue their walk around the city. It was very interesting. Later, Lady Rubia asked Sylvia if she could explain something. She asked why the Duchess had called her to come with her. The girl replied that she was curious to learn about the North. She wanted to deepen her knowledge. From that day on, the Marquis's daughter was to tell her everything about the region. Sylvia was interested in absolutely everything. And since Rubia knew a lot about her homeland, she would be able to tell her and share everything she knew. Rubia doubted that she could do anything good for Sylvia. The very thought of it made her feel uncomfortable. The Duke's wife said that as long as she was alive, Lady Rubia could not hope to become Randall's wife.